A general strike is underway in Myanmar after a violent weekend that saw 3 protesters shot dead. Thousands continue to demonstrate despite the threat of renewed military force. The European Union has joined international condemnation of the coup. The EU says it's ready to impose targeted sanctions on Myanmar's military leaders and their economic interests.
More than 1,000 Myanmar migrant workers living in Thailand have also been protesting against the coup. Gathering in front of the UN headquarters in Bangkok, they've observed a minute's silence to remember those who've died.
Today, it's a working day, but we, the people of Myanmar today, we sacrifice ourselves to come out and cry and express our feeling. Let the world know that we want democracy and we want freedom. We do not want any more dictatorship in our life. This is the cry of the younger generation at this point of time in front of the United Nations.
Myanmar citizens working in Thailand have turned up in droves in order to protest in front of the United Nations. Many have taken a day off with support as well as encouragement from their own employers. Now, some of them have even brought their children out here in order to join in the protest and to learn about this revolution, that they are standing in unity with their own countrymen back in Myanmar. Now, many of them are here in front of the United Nations because they want the UN to step in to help to bring down the military coup in the country and also to return governance to the civilian government back home in Myanmar. May Wong, CNA, Bangkok.
Joining us live for more is former Indonesian Foreign Minister Dr. Martin Natalegawa. Dr. Natalegawa, how do you perceive what's happening now in Myanmar?
Well, obviously it's a serious and a very grave setback to Myanmar's transition to democracy. It has ramifications, obviously, for Myanmar itself, the kind of violations of personal civil liberties and violations of democratic principles that we are seeing day in and day out can only be seen to be a grave development for Myanmar. But beyond Myanmar itself, this development has a potentially extremely grave consequences as well for our region, Southeast Asia, beyond Southeast Asia. And we are seeing now, day in, day out, various capitals in the world expressing their abhorrence and how they deplore the developments in Myanmar.
A military-ruled Myanmar is something ASEAN has had to deal with in the past. Is this a similar situation we're dealing with now?
Well, yes and no. You're quite right. We have had period in the past when military rule prevailed in Myanmar and ASEAN engaged and was very much part of the solution in pushing Myanmar towards democratic reform. But the key difference today compared to, say, a decade ago is that the people of Myanmar have tasted what freedom entails and what it means. And I think there is a yearning for freedom, a yearning for liberty and respect for democratic principle that is probably a bit less obvious at the time, say 10 years ago. And Myanmar obviously is now very much more connected globally through various means of communications. And therefore, it will be far more difficult, I believe, for the military authorities to try to rewind the developments and as if to return to how Myanmar was prior to the democratic reform. The genie is out of the bottle. The yearning for democracy and civil liberties is, I believe, very much ingrained amongst the Myanmar population.
Well, Indonesia is one of the world's largest democracies. It supported the idea of this informal ASEAN meeting on Myanmar. How do you expect the grouping to tackle the crisis going forward? Well,
it is only right, and I deeply appreciate the fact that Indonesia has chosen to adopt this outlook, this approach. Indonesia indeed is a major democratic country with respectful democratic principles in the region, and it must be seen to be ahead and to be leading the efforts. Over the past many years, ASEAN, including Indonesia within it, was very much part of the solution in Myanmar's in managing Myanmar's transition to democracy. There were very difficult years when the Myanmar issue really consumed ASEAN, really defined ASEAN in a way. But all of us within ASEAN, including us, Indonesia, with Myanmar, we work hand in hand to try to promote and encourage one another in support of democratic reform. Unfortunately, for whatever reasons, the recent few years have seen some backsliding, and we are where we are now. It is not too late for ASEAN to once again come to the fore. I think it will take more than a meeting, rather than be focused on whether or not there will be an informal ASEAN meeting or not. I think it's very important for ASEAN to be crystal clear in what their expectations are on Myanmar. And let it be recalled that when we speak of ASEAN, Myanmar is part of ASEAN. It is not as if it's ASEAN versus Myanmar, because Myanmar is part of the ASEAN community, part of the ASEAN family, and we must all find a way out. It is not too late for the military authorities to reverse back and allow democratic paths to resume.
With that in mind, then, what do you see as a diplomatically led solution for this situation that Myanmar now finds itself in?
Well, I think first and foremost, it is critically important for ASEAN to be seen and to be, as a matter of practice, to be in leadership position. How can we speak of ASEAN centrality beyond our immediate region in the Indo-Pacific and etc., when we can't even manage our own internal regional affairs? I think it is critically important for ASEAN, first and foremost, to be timely in its response and not to await until the situation becomes worse. It helps that within hours, within a day after the latest development, the chair of ASEAN already issued what could be the most minimum of statement, but it must be more than a statement. Myanmar, ASEAN, first and foremost, I believe, must ascertain the fate of the leaders, the democratically elected leaders of Myanmar, how their conditions are, and be crystal clear in calling for their immediate release and for democratic path to be resumed in Myanmar. One can well imagine if the situation is allowed to continue, not only would instability return, as it has already to Myanmar, but instead as well to the wider region. We've seen many examples elsewhere in other parts of the world where internal democratic convulsions became followed up by geopolitical tensions between so-called major powers. And ASEAN must provide an alternative vision that we can manage the development in Myanmar. And by the way, the ASEAN that we speak of today is an ASEAN that is a community respectful of democracy, respectful of good governance, and civil liberties, of the right for peaceful protests, etc. So ASEAN must be on the right side of history in this, and they must act urgently and not without delay.
Well, thank you for your thoughts this evening. Dr. Marty Natalegawa, former Indonesian Foreign Minister and former Director General for ASEAN Cooperation.